Hello, folks. Welcome to Update Brazil, episode 50. Today, we're going to analyze what is going on after this presidential election. So, we have been saying here that probably Donald Trump would win because we know the distance between the media and politics from the people. And then we have these two amazing commentators that since the beginning said the only one person who could beat Hillary Clinton would be Donald Trump. So today I would like to say welcome to Diana again. Thank you very much to join us.
Wonderful.
How's it going?
You great.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
well, it's an interesting thing to have Donald Trump win the election. And Diana, you wrote a piece about whether or not Hillary Clinton got a majority, or rather got more votes than he did. So maybe you could speak to that for a moment.
Yes, it's a very important point because the left in America, and probably the establishment right, is using Hillary Clinton's popular victory to try to undermine Donald Trump's electoral victory. And according to our Constitution, we have an Electoral College. And the reason for this goes back to the idea that the states, the 50 states, elect the president. It's not just whoever wins the most votes, because in that case, you could just win Los Angeles and New York City and basically win an election by popular vote, practically. And the other piece of this, however, is that we have a situation where our votes are not really protected any longer. And we know that there is a great amount of voter fraud, particularly in the non-citizen vote. And in the 2008, or rather analyzing the 2008 cycle, there were 3 political scientists from George Mason University and Old Dominion University in Virginia who looked at the 2008 election results and were able, by virtue of their scholarship and investigation, to come up with a raw number of non-citizen votes in that election. And the number they came up with was 1.2 million. That's a lot of votes. And indeed, they think that it turned the electoral votes to Barack Obama in the state of Virginia. They think that it resulted in the Senate victory of Al Franken, which gave the Democrats a 60-vote lock, a block on filibusters and so on for Barack Obama's first administration. So this is very significant just in those 2 ways alone, and I'm sure there are other aspects of it we could discuss. But flash forward 8 years later, we have had enormous incursions of illegal aliens into the country. We've had further attrition on voter ID rulings and so on across the country. So we can look at this and certainly imagine 1.2 million non-citizen votes here, let alone any kind of native citizen fraud going on. But just looking at the non-citizen vote, it's got to be at least 1.2 million. One election integrity outfit is already estimating 3 million non-citizen votes in this election. So you see how even in this in this current situation, it's pretty easy to wipe out Hillary Clinton's popular victory, looking at that non-citizen vote. But it's just important to note that it's not the way the system is set up. It is an electoral victory by the states, so that every state in the union is part of the electoral process. And this is just something that the founders built into the system that has worked very well. We've had a number of presidents come to power without that popular victory. And these include, it's interesting, when you actually go back and look, not only the more famous examples, but Woodrow Wilson in 1912 came to power without a popular victory if you add in the votes of all of his competitors. I think he had 3. And Bill Clinton, similarly, in 1992, came to power with an Electoral College win, of course, but running against George Bush, the father, and also Ross Perot, he did not have a popular victory over his 2 opponents. So these are just historical footnotes, but it's just part of the way the system works. Right now, we're just seeing this used as just a measure to try to gin up dissatisfaction and other kinds of unrest. But it's a very common situation and easily understood. Donald Trump won 60 million votes, over 60 million votes, and he won 30 states. So he had a very sizable victory.
Yeah,
there is a fact.
that's a good point. One thing I'd like to mention about the founders and this system is that what we see here is that if a certain party controls a state, if you didn't have electoral votes, they could, by cheating in their state, make more votes, make their state count for more votes by cheating and change the outcome of an election. Whereas with a fixed number of electoral votes, that cheating, if a certain party controls the electoral machinery in a state, that cheating doesn't have an effect on the election. It's kind of interesting because you notice that the reason I think that Hillary got a more votes with the cheating, but didn't win the electoral, is that the votes were only from those states she was already going to win.
Right, and we
basically.
still don't know the results in Michigan, which is kind of amazing.
Is that right?
Yes,
They didn't call it yet.
Right.
Yeah, when
Wow.
I saw 18,000 people saying out and loud, CNN sucks on Michigan, I said, that's over. That's over for Hillary Clinton. It's game over. Go back home, leftists. It's over for you all. But this is this fact that could, not fact, I mean, this possibility that Jeff just told you right now. It's the way that happens in Brazil. We don't have this system, vote or system process in Brazil. So this is exactly what happening in Brazil. That's all happens because you have, Brazil. It's a fake federation, so we don't have a very, very good freedom or a true freedom. The states they don't have a decision indeed. And one of our problem is the population is concentrated in Rio de Janeiro state and São Paulo state. And also, we have the northeast part of Brazil who have the majority of our poor people. So usually, the Workers' Party was getting vote all these years in Brazil because they were cheating and buying votes from these poor people. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of people. I'm not saying just a small part of the country. I'm saying it's a big part of our country. So a lot of poor people, a very, very huge number of voters, and they were using what we call in Brazil now I forgot in Portuguese. Look how weird is that? But I totally forgot in Portuguese. It's they have a lot of these social programs. They use that to buy the votes. So imagine if in Brazil we have this kind of system, probably we would never have such these dictators like Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva, because we could count with the states, and then that would be very, very different. Just to give an idea how it works in Brazil and how this kind of count doesn't work at all, because we have states who decide more for one president-elect, president candidate, and they just their numbers just doesn't matter.
So
Jeff,
anyway,
yeah.
I was gonna, the post-election news, of course, is that they're using school children now at high schools and saying, oh, you're excused from school if you want to go into the streets and disrupt traffic and protest against Donald Trump. And you've got this movement to say he's not our president. Maybe you could comment on that, Diana.
Yes. Well, this is something that has been brewing. throughout the post-election period, it's actually quite violent. We've seen, Breitbart today has a story, it has 10 examples of violence against Trump supporters, people who are just simply wearing a Trump hat, or people who are suspected of having supported Trump. We've seen mobs in Chicago drag a man out of his car, or he came out of his car on being hit, and then they dragged him away from his car. They stole his car. We've seen young people struck for and gone to the hospital at high schools for Trump support. And then we've seen these various protests across the country, different cities, very violent, a lot of property damage. Places like Portland, Washington, D.C. has been paralyzed at rush hour with some of these protests temporarily. And I don't feel the intensity at the end of this week that I felt earlier in the week. And I don't know if I don't have my finger on the pulse, or if they're brewing for something coming up, or they, I would say that this 6 weeks between now and Inauguration Day, which is January 20th, I think are concerning in terms of the way the left is protesting this election in a way that has never been seen before in American history. We've never had an election result come in that then saw people out in the streets across the country. Never. I cannot remember it anyway. I don't think it's ever happened. We've seen hotly contested elections. Of course, in 2000, we did have political gridlock as former Vice President Bush and later President George W. Bush were locked in this contest that ultimately went to the Supreme Court and all the rest of it. But there were not protests. There was not street violence. There was not this notion of threat. We've seen death threats coming toward Donald Trump and threats of harm to his wife and family. This is the kind of mood we've got going. And we've seen meetings, emergency meetings, it seems, called by leftist groups to try to figure out what to do about this election victory that they were not expecting. And so what will happen there? We've already seen discussions of protests on Inauguration Day, what that will portend. We don't really know what will catch fire here. And meanwhile, though, we are also seeing evidence that these people out in the streets, a lot of them are paid. We're seeing ads on Craigslist, the want ads on the internet, paying per diems to go out and protest. I mean, so this is not necessarily an organic thing. In fact, I think we can say it is not. But what it can become, or what kind of harm these people can affect, obviously remains to be seen. But I think this is a concerning time. We're also starting to see efforts to pressure the electors, the people who actually go and officially seal the election results, the Electoral College, which meets, I think, December 18th, if I'm not mistaken. Pressure on them to change their votes in states where that is legal. It's not customary. There usually are one or two. I mean, this is not a historical impossibility. It does happen, but not in numbers to change an election. So that's kind of the scary part of what we're looking at, kind of wondering how far this leftist movement will take the dissatisfaction on the left. Amazingly, there was just out of San Francisco yesterday, teachers, some kind of program about a way to talk to students about the election results, whereby they are basically telling the students not to accept them, that Hillary Clinton didn't really lose and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of very bad agitprop happening, and this is kind of the mood of things right now. So we're a very divided country, but this is the time where the new administration is putting things together, and they're doing marvelously well. So we've got good and bad going on, mostly good.
Yeah, and, it's interesting to see this because what you're basically saying is that they don't accept the constitutional process of an election, and not accepting is dangerous to the Constitution, because it means that if you have tens of millions of people who say not my president, then what are they doing? Is this 1860 and they're seceding from the Union?
Well, That's exactly it. And that's why I think it's so shocking to see students being excused to demonstrate in this fashion. We don't demonstrate election results. It's not like there's an anti-war movement or a pro-life movement where people come out in the streets to show support for something. This is an election that is the way we settle our differences, and there's a whole cohort being told, and the media is fanning the flames here in terms of rationalizing this form of dissent, which is very anti-constitutional. It's not just a matter of freedom of speech and so on, because there is an animus here against the election process that is very alarming, and particularly when it goes to the younger generations, because they're being brought up and being told and endorsed in terms of, you don't like an election, go out and protest it. Well, what can happen then? We don't know. Ours is preparation for something more. We don't know. But it certainly is a tremendous exception in our traditions and lawful, peaceful exchange of power. And I will add that we're not seeing Democratic leaders, such as President Obama, come out and say, this was an election, these are the results, get out of the streets. Go back and field a candidate in a year or two, write letters to the editor, organize a new political party, whatever. But this is not being identified as anti-constitutional, as anti-election, as anti-democratic process by the Democratic leadership. And I think that is the most alarming aspect of this. Predictable, of course, but alarming, because this is where we are in our political history.
Yeah, and of course it's not. What really amazes me is the claim that enforcing our laws, our immigration laws, and our border control laws, which are laws of the land,
right,
that enforcing them is racist.
Yes.
And it's not like they're trying to change those laws. They're trying to say that basically Donald Trump is now Hitler because he wants to deport 3 million criminally illegal aliens, those who are estimated of the maybe 20 million illegals who are here, those who are engaged in criminal activity, like with different mafias from abroad, from El Salvador, from Mexico, from wherever. And this seems perfectly legitimate, but for the president of Mexico to make a statement to calm Mexican citizens here in the United States, it's extraordinary, because they're admitting that they're basically have taken advantage of breaking our laws, and that somehow there is a right to break laws in the United States. They have a right to it somehow.
Yes, exactly, by virtue of kind of occupying the territory in a fashion. It's very disorienting. I mean, I think that's a word you and I have used before to describe a lot of these phenomena. It is disorienting. Another aspect of it that is extremely disorienting and also alarming in a political sense is we have a number of these we have scores of sanctuary cities where federal immigration law is not enforced by order of the mayors. And Donald Trump has made this one of his mandates. He constantly campaigned on this notion of not only restoring our border and deporting criminal illegal aliens and others in violation of the law, but he also has made a huge mandate of his intention to stop sanctuary cities or at least by stopping federal funding if they do not comply with federal law. And these cities these mayors are putting this president-elect on notice, that some of them, that they have no intention of following federal immigration law or allowing federal enforcement of immigration law inside their cities. This is extraordinary. There was actually a demonstration at Columbia University in New York where illegal students were calling for Columbia to become a sanctuary campus. So the layers of lawlessness in our society are deep. And I think that there is the profound switch at the top can do so much to change it. I do not think that the situation is unchangeable. I think that actually a great deal can be done very quickly simply by virtue of the president seeking to enforce these various laws. But you do see a whole way of life that has been going on for some time here, decades, has to be reversed. It's a brain switch, and it needs to extend to Columbia University and New York City and Chicago and other places where law is not being enforced. And Donald Trump campaigned, really, it's another mandate of his. He campaigned as the law and order president. So I think he has every expectation and every right to expect to enforce these various campaign promises about simply restoring law and order in the land. I mean, this is a very basic thing, and it is the basic thing.
Yeah, and part of the lawlessness, speaking of which, extends back to our Justice Department.
Yes.
And now I understand, is it true that Jeff Sessions has been named the next Attorney General?
That is the breaking news of the day. Yes. Yes, this is very exciting. This is huge, as President-elect Trump would say. This is fantastic. It's absolutely marvelous news, and it really is a sign of Donald Trump's continuing strength and expectations, and really, I think, an extension of his mystique to name Senator Sessions. We know that this will be a huge confirmation battle, notwithstanding the fact that Senator Sessions is a distinguished member of the Senate, whereby he will be confirmed. But this will be one of the big battles that we can expect, but there will be so many. And this is what is so fantastic about the prospect of this new administration. They really do represent change, and they really seem serious. This was not just campaign rhetoric. We're seeing muscle now applied to the campaign program that Donald Trump was so successful with.
Jeff, I would like just to go back a little bit. When Diana said we have a divided country and we have these conflicts going on, and they were very aggressive on the streets, I just would like to talk to American people to enlighten them that is exactly what happened in Brazil after our impeachment. It's just control paste, it's copy and paste. That's it. Everything that happened in Brazil, it's happening in America. Everything. When I say everything, it's everything. People paid on the streets to protest against democracy, and we have a lot of phrase and saying here. One of them that I really like is democracy is good when it turns in my favor.
Right.
We say that to the leftists here. Democracy is very good when it turns in my favor.
Right.
When it doesn't turn in my favor, that's not good democracy anymore. And they start saying people are dumb, and people are ugly, and people are deplorable, and people are stupid. They don't know how to vote. When they win, they say no. People are enlightened. People are very smart and clever right now. They are open-minded. They don't like these conservative things. But once they have been destroyed, totally destroyed, all the media. When I read the New York Times letter to their reader, that was fantastic. Now we're gonna say the truth. Oh, right now, it's good. It's good that right now you decided to say the truth. That's pretty good. So all these years, you are confessing that you never have saying the truth for us. Just right now. Now you're gonna make this. Now we need to change. That's not nice to do that. And other thing that I would like to say is when they act like this, I know that can sound like neat or weird, but when they act like that, Diana and Jeff Nyquist, I just thank God, because how hard is to explain that corruption is just a way of the communism. When they show themselves without any mask, without anything, that's so easy for us. I told you they are communists. When you laughed at me when we were saying they were communists, you said, no, it's just corruption. Our problem is corruption. No way, our problem is not corruption. Corruption is the way they do that. Corruption is just a, you know, it's just a piece of tool, how they buy and change our structure of our infrastructure, the structure of our civilization. And when they show themselves, they start stealing people from the street, when they start breaking all the laws, when they start damage the streets and the property, inviting private property. How relieved I feel, because it's like, whew, finally they are communists. Yes, they are. I know. It's like it's like, I told you so. I told you so. And this is what I would like to say to American people. Well, when the dogs start barking, you don't need to be scared. They are just showing themselves. How hard is to explain what is going on in America? Look at your books. How hard is it is explaining to American people? America have been betrayed. Communism is inside America. Look at your book, Diana. Look at your book, Jeff Nicholas. How hard is it to take this scum? I forgot to say that in English. When you take this from the eyes, from people's eyes, you know, this cloth from the eyes, and tell them, look at the reality. You have been betrayed by communists. And people, no, it's just a matter of corruption. It's just a matter of how to buy and sell votes. No, it's not like that. Hillary Clinton did not condemn at least one action of these stupid people are on the street. She didn't say anything. It's just accusing your opponent doing what you do. She said Donald Trump would be very dangerous. But now she's just supporting, she's not saying anything, but she's supporting these dangerous people. So she is the danger one. That's all I would like to say. Sorry to take too long.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with you, Alan. That was brilliantly said. You know, I'm reminded of Eric Voegelin's description of Germany under the Nazis. He called it radical stupidity. He used the term radical stupidity, and he said that these people, it's their perception of reality has been restructured. So they no longer see reality. They only see this leftist idea of reality. And I was mentioning to Diana yesterday is that you can tell that you're dealing with people who are communists, because the communist method in their structure of making a diluted reality is to have different iterations of lies. So you have one group of lies, and those lies become obsolete. People end up seeing through them. As you say, the veil, you know, the falls and people see it. So then they're in between, and then they say, oh, well, now we're going to tell the truth, and then a new iteration of lies. But wait a minute, you weren't telling the truth before. Wait a minute, let's go back to that. Rewind. Wait a minute, you weren't telling us the truth. Why should we believe you now? It's like Galitzin says, new lies for old.
Right. Right. And so much of it becomes, in this atmosphere, a deflection. And indeed, Donald Trump was on with Leslie Stahl, I believe, recently in an interview, and she asked him to denounce violence in his supporters' name. In other words, asking him to, you know, tell his supporters not to be violent. I have not seen reports of anything beyond, you know, yelling or screaming, but I have not seen the kind of beatings and carjackings that we're seeing on the other side and so on. But she did not. I don't think she or anyone else has asked Hillary Clinton to speak out. I mean, I mentioned Obama not speaking out. He's the one who's been doing a lot of talking lately. But Hillary Clinton is the one who ostensibly is being supported by these people in the streets. And she has said nothing. And I think, as Alan is saying, that is very telling. It's really all you need to know. These people are not Democrats, small d Democrats. These people do not want the constitutional process to work. They don't want a peaceful transition of power. If that were so, they would come out and say, absolutely not. This is not how we do things. Go back to your towns and localities and start anew and win the next race. I mean, that's what the American tradition is. That's what the democratic tradition is. Not go in the streets. And meanwhile, their contributors, very rich multimillionaires, billionaires, actually gathered in Washington under the rubric of this group called the Democracy Alliance, which is a group of progressive billionaires, millionaires. I would call them Marxists. Alan, I'm sure you'd agree, who came together at a very fancy Washington hotel for 3 days in secret meetings to try to figure out how to combat the Trump presidency, probably how to foment continued mischief. I think there was also a report about them figuring out how to fund further demonstrations and so on. And when you track back the kinds of groups that are represented, aside from the money men, they call them dark money men, you see these communist groups, International Answer, Revolutionary Communist, the Bob Avakian group, which is a Maoist type communist group. You see some of these other groups that are out and out communist parties. They're very small, as they only have to be, as we all know. Communists only have to work in very small numbers in order to create fronts and infiltrate organizations. That's how they always have worked. So this is what we're looking at. And Alan, you say, how hard is it for us to say that? Well, it's not hard for us together to say this here, but it's very hard for people in the United States to understand this, because for decades we have been told that communism doesn't exist, that the Soviet Union went away, that there's no global communist movement, that it failed, communism failed, that socialism is gone. I mean, these are the things we have been schooled in. And so people right now looking at the streets and looking at these very sinister groups mobilizing to thwart and even overthrow the Constitution here, we don't know, as a country, we don't know how to talk about it, and we don't know what we're looking at. And so this is to our opponent's advantage. I am heartened, but in so many ways by the Trump victory, hoping to see, I think there will be people who understand this at a better level going into this administration than we've had in a very long time. Watch that space. But this is kind of where we are.
I'm sorry, but they don't know. They don't know because they are dumb enough to avoid to read your books. That's it. I'm sorry. I'm really being honest. American people doesn't know how to see this situation because they keep avoiding read your book and Jeff's book. That's all. They are being dumb. All the journalists on media, they don't know how to talk about it. They really see something, oh, look at this, a very, very, very organized people using communist flag, but communism didn't die. Yes, you think like this because you don't read good books. That's it, dude. Sorry.
I'll take that as the answer, yeah. But you're right, and you always do see communist flags. You always in these protests, you do see them. They're there. But then the press will say, oh, well, there's so few of them. There's so few communists. The party's so small. They always fall back on that, not understanding how any of it works. So, but this is an education, because again, we have not seen this kind of disturbance of an election process before, and I hope we don't see it grow.
Yeah, and that seems so clear that they never have been, they never have read any good book about communism, because that was always this way. That was a minority group that starts everything against a very majority group that didn't do anything back. In Russia, in Mexico, during the Cristiano War, in Spain, in Portugal, in Poland, come on. When I see these journalists, I really lost my patience. I see, like, what are you doing there? Yeah. It's your job. Like a very good journalist in Brazil said, Alexandre Borges, he was one of the small journalists who said Donald Trump would win. He said, when a journalist say, I don't know how to explain this, he is confessing, I don't know how to do my job, because your job is explain things.
It's true.
Yeah.
I would say that the failure of the entire political class of professors, journalists, analysts, pundits is profound, because they missed the whole thing. They missed the whole thing when they come out and they miss the communist thing. They miss the S word and the M word for Marx, the C word for communism. This is what it is. It's like a religion, and in this religion, just like with the Nazis, just like what Eric Vergland says, it's all about a completely disconnected way of looking at reality. They are not seeing the reality that normal people see. They're
Well,
seeing.
so true. And I would just add that it's even in terms of political philosophy aside. My husband in downtown Washington had a conversation, I believe she was with Sky News, the British reporter, and they had a brief discussion about the election, and the corruption of Hillary Clinton came up. And this reporter, who'd been covering the Trump campaign throughout this period, actually said to him, "But the Clinton Foundation does charity, does good works."
Sorry.
And the thing is, if you've been following it all, the percentage of the money that the Clinton Foundation sucked up is something like 8% or under 10% toward charitable works. It was the most barest, minimalist possible thing, and that a journalist who supposedly was covering the election, not to know that, and this was the day after the election, not to know this is another. It's just one tiny anecdote, but in terms of alternate reality, they do inhabit it. I'm sure her editor believes that, and everyone else in her newsroom, and this is how these things perpetuate, and it is disconnected from reality. But it's very difficult for people of limited capacity, let's say, because everything they are looking at is sealed off from this information. I mean, it's really extraordinary that if Peter Schweitzer, who's the journalist who broke and put together a lot of the Clinton Foundation corruption, he put it together in a book called Clinton Cash, and a video that's available free online to watch, which really lays out the case of the Clinton really ransacking the world in exchange for contributions to this foundation. It was not reported on in the media. His findings were barely reported on. Now, the New York Times, to its credit, did re-report and check out and extend some of his reporting on the sale of American uranium stocks to Russia through a company called Uranium One, in exchange for our $145 million from the Uranium One board into the Clinton Foundation. Putin ended up with 20% of American uranium. This was something that did actually get to New York Times readers, I have to say. However, that was an exception. And did the FBI pick up on these things? We don't know. But in terms of the echo chamber, this information, this hard information, this open source information, did not enter the mainstream debate. So alternate reality becomes very easy to construct.
Yeah, alternate reality is part of the whole deal, and with the left, see, it's just like Olavo has explained in his classes. Olavo de Carvalho is that they see the future very clearly. See, they see this great socialist future, which is inevitably coming to the world, and so they're on the side of history. They're on the side of what must win, and it's inconceivable that somebody like Trump, who's going to take us back to this horrible racist, sexist, misogynistic past, is going to win, because they're headed towards the paradise of heaven on earth. And I remember I was at the gym, and they had this communist channel at my gym, and so I was on the treadmill and I watched it. And this communist was talking, and behind him was a sign that said, "Bringing heaven on earth." It was literally,
Wow.
it's just like Eric Berglund says, emanatizing the Gnostic eschaton. You know, if people understand that phrase, it means bringing heaven on earth. That's basically what it means, bringing about the apocalypse and bringing about heaven on earth, the New Jerusalem, etc., etc. But it's ridiculous because it's human politics. You can't bring heaven on earth. That's the whole nature of it.
Right. Right. And then the other
As
aspect of the press failure and this continuing echo chamber designed to undermine Trump is that Donald Trump is being portrayed as the tool of Russia by the left that is the tool of communism, if not Russia. And indeed, the Obama-Clinton administration was very good for Putin's Russia. Hillary Clinton was very good. I mentioned the Uranium One deal that delivered all this uranium to Putin. But there are other deals, the Skolkovo development, which is this gigantic Russian Western technological city outside of Russia that's ramped up their technological know-how and capacity, including their nuclear abilities and so on. This was something that was an Obama-Clinton project. But it's Donald Trump that they say literally is the Russian puppet, the Putin's agent. It's extraordinary. And again, this gigantic act of deflection without any evidence. Whereas on the other side, there's endless evidence, and it goes back deep into the Clintons' whole careers in terms of aiding and abetting communist countries to become militarily expert, as we saw in the Bill Clinton administration with China, and then these developments under Hillary Clinton with Russia. It's remarkable, but this is again a very big PR point that we're continuing to hear. We started out talking about the popular vote. That's one aspect of this effort to undermine. The other is to sow doubt in the minds of people about Donald Trump's loyalties. But the ironic thing is that these are people and newspapers, Washington Post and other liberal papers, that never ever perceived any threat coming from Russia or communism before in their entire existences. So it's very disorienting and very very slippery to catch hold of, but it's part of these false narratives that are being sown and repeated and echoed around. So if Trump's not a Nazi, he's a Russian puppet. This is what we're living with right now.
Yeah, and in regard to this, I have been reading Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's book because there was these concerns that Cliff Kincaid raised about Flynn's trip to Russia and so on. And now what you just said, and now it dawns on me as you were talking. I mean, Flynn is very specific in his book. He sounds like me. He says, we are against an alliance of countries which include China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Bolivia, Venezuela, Cuba. He names all those countries in his book. And then he names, of course, the Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on, his movements. And then, so he goes to Russia. Well, you see, the Russians were setting up this narrative that Trump is a Russian puppet. And so inviting Flynn to Russia and having him give a lecture at GRU headquarters was a way of, they were trying to compromise Flynn. They were trying to make Flynn look like he was close to them. And then it was interesting when Flynn was interviewed later by the American press about his trip to Russia. They said, you were sitting right next to Vladimir Putin. And he said, well, they just did that. He sat next to me and he says, don't you realize how that picture looked? And he said, well, I didn't make the seating arrangements, they did. But then it dawns on me, wait a minute, they wanted Putin sitting next to Flynn because they're engaged in this propaganda effort to tar Donald Trump with this idea that he's a Russian stooge, so that Hillary Clinton, their real Russian stooge, can come and say this on national TV, you're a Russian puppet, what she said in the third debate.
Right, literally, yes.
Literally.
Yeah. And we
Yeah.
we had in the very early years of the Obama term, we actually had the Russian sleeper cell of illegals unmasked and deported very quickly before they could be sufficiently debriefed, I will add. And the reason for the quickness, Bill Gertz reported, was because one of them was becoming too close to Hillary Clinton. So again, there are all these relationships and facts that don't need a false narrative, that just are sitting there waiting to be discussed and acknowledged, and yet the whole effort to, as Jeff's saying, to tar Donald Trump as this Russian asset is just been extraordinary, given that he's been a businessman all this time. He just got into this game. You know, it's there's no record there that we have seen that gives any evidence for this narrative. And coming from the left, it's very suspicious, because when was the last time they were worried about Russia?
Yeah, it is very suspicious. Alan, you had a question?
Yes. Everyone, I think both of you have seen Obama asking for illegal immigrants go to vote.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So once he already wanted to American people and illegal immigrants to break the law, do you think that he's playing like the good cop and bad cop, like Hillary and Obama? Like, I will play the good cop. Don't do that, guys. That's not good. This is against the law. While Hillary Clinton keeping silence, do you think he's playing like the bad cop and good cop?
Well, I think he's mostly been a bad cop, a subdued cop. He's been conciliatory, seemingly, but I think he did miss a big opportunity in order to ask to tell people not to demonstrate election results. But that was, I mean, isn't that seditious to call on people to break a law in order to illegally elect a candidate? I mean, I would be very curious if there's any constitutional lawyer who looks at this. To me, it seems to be abetting a crime against our election process. So I haven't seen the good cop, except that I think they're trying to be very smart and seem conciliatory themselves to set a tone for themselves, so that they have, that they are somehow not responsible for what's going on the street.
It's kind of sad to see America this way. I have been there for 3 years in total. And one thing that really amazed me when I met America, United States, by first time, was how the law was very, very straightforward. And now I see the bad and the worst aspect of Brazil in America. Mm. This is such a thing if I could, I would like to say to all American people, you are becoming the worst aspect of Brazil, because you are not following the law anymore. Yeah. Your country have been so strongly famous by following the law in all aspects: driving cars, walking, crossing the street, buying anything on the market, or even the complex laws about renting and selling and so on. And now the president, not the governor, not the federal deputy, not a congressman, not just a salesman, but the president, the most important person in the country, is saying something against the law just to get his party elected.
Yeah.
And nobody will do anything.
Yeah.
I would like to ask American people, do you want to become like Brazil? Come here, come down here just to see how this country is a mess, because it's not following any law. Why you American people are losing, your soul, something that made you so great, so big, and now you are just putting that in the trash. Wake up, America, really. There's still time.
Yes, I mean, this is really the tragedy of our time. It's certainly in these Obama terms, we've seen a lawless president who should have been impeached probably 20 times. There were so many counts of impeachment to draw up against him. And indeed, when I was writing about this election cycle, back when the campaign started, I called my series the Post-Constitutional Election, because I think America is post-constitutional. Our system is broken. The president was not only, he's the executive, he's not supposed to write laws. He was writing laws, innumerable laws, immigration, healthcare, you name it. His executive overreach is not even a good word for it, just innumerable lawless actions turned him into an imperial president. This was what some people started to call him, and this is one of my great disappointments with Senator Ted Cruz. He was someone who called him out on these things, and yet had no intention of following through with the remedy that our founders gave us, which is impeachment. This is what should have happened. This is where there was mounds of evidence. They never even began to draw up articles of impeachment, but this was the failure of the People's House, of the Congress, both houses, the vast Republican majority that came in 2014 when we had the largest Republican majority since the 1920s, and they couldn't even have an exploratory articles of impeachment subcommittee start drafting these things. I mean, this really was the great shame of this 21st century period. And again, what we see now going forward is complaints that Donald Trump is not going to respect the Constitution, that he is an authoritarian figure. Well, again, you look at it and you say, we have been living through authoritarian times where we have a chief executive who very famously said, I have a phone and I have a pen, meaning he just was going to do what he wanted without any checks and balances. They're saying that Donald Trump is the threat to all of these things that have already been destroyed by this presidency of Barack Obama. He's not the first. I don't mean to suggest that he is unique in this overreaching chief executive role, but his offenses are profound, constant, and destructive. And Donald Trump actually, is another point of correction that we have hope to see fulfilled. And I hope we will see this fulfilled, restoring the balance of power. But the big problem, Alan, has been that our representatives, the closest thing we have to direct, any kind of direct, our representatives in the House and the Senate, they had this crisis of no courage in terms of doing what they were sworn to do, which was to protect the Constitution. So this is part of our crisis and part of what you are seeing and describing very accurately, I will say.
Well, and I would like to add that most of these people are criticizing Trump. I'm talking about to the right wing. I'm not talking about to the Democrats.
Right.
Most of these criticizers of Trump's criticizers, they are being childish. You know why? Because they are comparing Trump with the perfection. They don't see the big picture. Once they will wait for a perfect president who never have been in America, who never have been ruled, doesn't exist a perfect president. And people really don't realize that. They go to this semantic war. It's like here you have the idea of a president. You have a perfect president in your mind who never have been enrolled, who never exist. And then you compare Trump with your idea of a president. This is so stupid. Stop being like this, right wing in America, please. You have Trump and you have Hillary. That's it. You have the Communist Party inside the Democrat, or better say, you have Democrats who is totally leftist, who is totally communist and socialist, with different levels. And then you have the Republicans. Of course, you can say, oh, I would prefer Ben Carson, I would prefer Mark Rubio, I would prefer Ted Cruz. Okay, fine. But none of them get there. None of them could beat Hillary Clinton. That's the truth. And what happened? Now you have President Trump, elected President Trump, and now you need to deal with it. And don't be stupid. I was reading some comments, and I don't want to mention them, but it's like a child, It's like a child who never have